So I want to make sure that everyone's here for the right reason, first of all. I'm Courtney Sherwood. I'm here to talk about backgrounding a source, a business, or a nonprofit, and what are some of the online databases that exist out there for free. I had a presentation prepared, and my laptop would not turn on this morning, which is why I missed the first part of today. But I was able to scramble, and instead of putting this where I'd want it, it's on my own personal site. I'm going to look for a permanent home for this later because my server is not equipped for lots of hits, and I don't think my brother will let me keep using it for free if if this stays for long. But it is, if you go to CourtneySherwood.com/WordPress, there's a link backgrounding a source, business, or nonprofit at the moment that has this information, and I'll replace it with a link to the permanent site once I find a new permanent home. WordPress.com. Yeah, good call. Very briefly, I just want to introduce myself. I'm Courtney Sherwood. I work in old school print journalism and have for basically since I got out of college and a little bit before. For the last 10 years, I've been in the Pacific Northwest, primarily working in Washington State, although I've worked a little bit in Oregon as well. And today I'm going to talk about, and I should say my primary background is in business journalism, and which is maybe makes me a little different from most journalists who are more oriented towards covering government. Anyhow, that's who I am. Before I get into the presentation, I do want to get a feel for where you folks come from so that I'm not too far off base. And I wanted to see if I could do a little survey. Who here, if anyone, works for sort of old media forms such as print or broadcast? Okay, so a good number. What about, is anyone here doing online only? And then any of you doing a mix? Okay. And then are most of you doing this for, is this, if you could raise your hand, are you doing this for a living? Is this your full time?
What are we doing living?
Paying, well, paying your bills or one of your major sources of income. Okay. And then, you know, as opposed to, are any of you doing this as maybe a volunteer, an unpaid contributor to a website, a citizen journalist? Is there anyone in that category? Okay. And then also, are you working primarily for yourself? Yeah, freelancer, you know, however you would define that, versus working for an organization. Okay, so this is a very mixed group. And then I also do want to get a feel for how many of you are primarily interested in Oregon and anything about Washington would not be very interesting to you. And is there anyone here who would like to hear the Washington stuff as well? Yeah. Okay, I just don't want to waste your time. And then I also am wondering, maybe we can just speak out instead of going through the list. I can go through the whole of everything, or would people be more interested in a focus on businesses or on nonprofits or a more general sort of broad presentation? Broad? Good to hear. Okay. So the first thing I want to start out with is just, before you even look for databases that exist online, there's some key questions that you should ask that'll help you guide how you research someone and how far you go, what databases you look for. This isn't comprehensive, but this is some of the stuff that you might want to ask. So why are you doing this? Are you writing a profile of someone and you just want to know everything that you can broadly find out? Are you writing something nice and you want to cover your ass so you don't embarrass yourself the next day when everyone says, yeah, he's a deadbeat dad and every car his shop fixes breaks, and you know, or do you have a suspicion that something is going on that you'd like to dig into? Maybe you got a tip, you know something. Are there geographic limits to your search? Is this someone who lives in one state or region? Are you investigating a business that might have multiple locations? There are some databases that are national and others that are state or region specific. What industry in sort of broad terms are you looking into? Are you researching someone in the business sector, someone who is more a public servant, a nonprofit, a government employee. You know, if you're researching a business or a person in business, you're going to be looking in business-related databases versus if you're researching someone in politics, you're going to be looking maybe for campaign finance, so on. And then what relationships do you may find out more about relationships as you do your work, but what relationships do you know about between your target and the organizations that exist out there? Is this someone who is president of a company and serves on a board of some, you know, the planning commission and works for a nonprofit? For every organization that you know they're involved in, that's one more place that you might want to look for online information. Yeah, you know, who are the corporate sponsors or who does the business itself sponsor? So that's the real basic stuff. Does anybody have any questions? Is this all pretty straightforward at this point? Okay. So here's some very bare minimum. If you just want to cover your ass before you run this glowing profile of you know, the recent pageant winner who's made wonderful claims, and you'd hate to find out that really she has a secret criminal record or something. There's some basic things that are generally a good practice to do anytime you write something about a person that's beyond a few sentences. One that Washington has available that Oregon doesn't is a great database. This is not a state official database. This was obtained through public records and created by Sound Politics in Washington State. Voter database, voter registration database. You can plug in a street address here, or you can search by name. Anybody here willing to volunteer to be looked up? I could. Well, I'll do the. Tim Levitt, good call. Tim Levitt is the mayor of Vancouver. It's Leavitt, is that right? Or am I? And then Timothy, I'm assuming. So he's the mayor of Vancouver. Let's make sure he's actually a registered voter in Washington State. There he is. So we now, nope, that's not him. Unless he's
He's not in Stonewall.
no. So I either spelled his name wrong or he's not a registered voter, which would be an interesting story. I'm assuming I spelled his name wrong. Yeah.
How old does this go back?
It's current registrants, and then it's updated periodically, so old stuff falls off. It doesn't have a whole history of where you live. It's just current information. This most recent set was updated March 31st, so folks who registered after then or changed their addresses after then. The best use of it, I'll do one that I did recently. Bart Phillips is the head of an economic development agency who recently announced he's leaving. And we needed to know how old he was, and he wasn't answering phone calls after putting this out. So we looked this up. I happen to know that he's Barton, not the other one. So I was able to see, okay, he was born in 1955. We were able to add his age to the story. It's not that big of a deal. On the other hand, if there's a crime that happens with a name that's common and you don't know, okay, did it really happen at the guy we think's house or was it someone else? You can say, okay, it was this Bart Phillips because it happened on Olive Street. Oh, no, it wasn't. So it's sort of a minor little fact check, but it's a nice thing, nice little piece of information to find someone's age or street address and confirm that they're a registered voter within Washington State. Because this is not government, because this is put up by Sound Politics of Washington, there's no guarantee it'll last for all time. It's there as long as they choose to provide it. But it's been there for a number of years at this point, and let's hope that they keep it up. On court records, this is again, Washington has a lot more information online for free than Oregon does. And if you do find this website, there's links for each of these websites that I'm talking about here. The Washington State courts, you can't actually access the full documents, but you can search by name. Over here you see the name search. You can search statewide in state level, if you're not familiar with how courts work, each county, like in Oregon, Multnomah County, even though it's based in the court, that's the state court system. Every county has its own state level court. And then the U.S. District Court of Oregon, for example, which is a statewide court, is actually part of the federal court system. and they're all completely separate and have separate databases. So if you're searching in a state court, you're not going to find out about a federal charge or lawsuit. But in Washington, you can search names, and it'll plug in that name and search for the whole state. And this will include, and you have to click a disclaimer that says you're not going to do really bad stuff, and that you understand that it's not perfect. We could look up, poor Bart. We could look him up again, Bart Phillips. This is going to tell me that these cases exist. However, I can't see what the documents are. I don't know if this is the same guy. There's more than one Bart Phillips in Clark County, Washington, even. And all I know is that there's something. It tells you there's something there that you might want to look into, but it doesn't tell you more than that. And you'd actually have to call the courthouse or visit it in order to get it. And I should say, on a state level, divorces are in here, as well as lawsuits. Someone could be the suer or the suee, and criminal cases. So just knowing there's litigation doesn't mean you should assume something bad, but it might mean that you want to do one more step of checking. In Oregon, there is a way to search state courts. It is not free. I don't have an account, so I can't show you everything, but it is called OGIN, and it's fairly new. OGIN's been around for a long time, and you can go to Multnomah County or any county courthouse and search in this system for no cost whatsoever and review documents for free if you go there in person. However, if you don't want to leave your home and want to look something up, just in the last year, they have now made this online for a modest fee. And they've had an online service for attorneys' offices that was pretty spendy for a long time too, but this is actually something people might be able to afford. Their pricing is very wacky and has to do with what time you do your search. If it's like a busy time, it costs more, and if it's in the middle of the night, it costs less, and what part of their database you draw from, and all this other stuff. So it's really hard to know exactly what it's going to cost, but you can estimate it'll be about 25 cents a page to download stuff. And then the last thing I wanted to point out is that the federal courts and these are the only the Oregon and federal courts are the only two pay sites that I'm going to be talking about today. But they're worth it they're certainly worth it in at least knowing about, and if you have a news organization budget, it's worth looking into.
Will waive your fees up to $10, like if you
Oh.
$10 every quarter.
Yeah.
The waiver fees. Plus, there's a Firefox plugin called Recap the Law that every time you do a Pacer search, it adds it to a database. So if someone else searches it later, it'll be free from that database.
Okay. I guess I'll repeat that for the recording. Bill was just telling us that, and it's a very good point. So when you sign up for a Pacer account, you have to give it your credit card number. If over the and then every 3 months you'll get a bill. If you charge less than $10 worth of searches, it will be forgiven. And Bill was saying that there's also a plug-in for the Firefox browser. I don't know anything about that, but
That's called Recap the Law.
Recap the Law.
And if you Google it, you'll see a lot of discussion of it.
Great. I'm going to do a search on Pacer real quick. If I wrote my password down. This one costs about 8 cents a page. So it's fairly cheap in the land of public records. If you don't do it that often, it may not cost you anything if you keep it down to below $10. And it includes all state level court cases, appeal court. This can be civil or criminal, and it also includes bankruptcy. And it doesn't just tell you what's there. You can actually look at the documents themselves. I'm going to show you the bankruptcy documents from my news organization, which is no longer in bankruptcy. Thank you. But it's just cool to know what you can see, I think. So
This is the federal?
this is the federal Pacer court system. It is really worth it, especially if you're backgrounding a business or nonprofit that's of any size, because it's you'd be surprised at the kinds of litigation they're involved in. Sometimes it's patent related. I think I've found it much more interesting on civil than on criminal stuff, but I'm sure if you're investigating a criminal, it's worth checking out too.
Now you're saying it.
Oh, sorry. Mm-hmm.
Well, I was just going to ask if it's financial, and for you
Yeah, if you look up a bankruptcy, it'll include all of the documents. They redact social security numbers most of the time, although I've seen ones where they forgot. And then if they notice that they forgot, they'll take that version of the form offline and put a new one online with the social security redacted. So, yeah.
You said it's 8 cents a page for every click?
For
it's all
not
for
every click.
print?
So that search that I just did, I'm going to go back. So I just did a search. It says at the bottom here, you have been billed, it says 1 page but $0. So I guess I wasn't billed for the search. Some searches you are billed for, and it usually warns you.
So it's page view, technically.
Well, let me show you a little more. It's not the same. It's not. It's more complicated than that. So.
You when you're being billed.
Yeah. So here I'm clicking to see what the list of all the documents are, and I'm not getting billed to do this. This is all the documents associated with the Colombians' bankruptcy. And I'm going to look up their initial petition to declare bankruptcy. So here, when I click that I want to look at it, it says, and I don't know how well you can read it, there's 8 billable pages, and it's going to cost me 64 cents to look at it. So I have an advance warning about that. Now I'm going to go ahead and do it anyhow. So I'm sacrificing 64 hard-earned cents in the name of education. And you can see these are actual pages from a scanned document or from a PDF. So when they say pages, it's not, for the most part, it's actual pages of a document as opposed to a page view. And you can see, this is just the initial filing, so it's going to have less detail, but it'll tell you who the attorney is here, where they're located and how to contact them, who the authorized head of the company, or if it's a personal bankruptcy, who's declaring it, other names that might be associated with the individual or business. Yeah, well, we're a newspaper, so we own a bunch of websites, basically, usually, and I don't know if I picked the right, yeah, here we go. It'll have a list of creditors. Who do we owe money to? I don't want to go into this too much because the Colombians come out of it and they're doing good now. But if you're looking somebody up and you want to know what financial relationships they have, and they've been through a bankruptcy, this will tell you who they owe money to, the mailing addresses, often the phone numbers and attorneys of those people. It's very good. And then on criminal cases, you can get a lot of information about what they've been alleged to have done. On civil cases, you can read the complaint in which a horrible act is alleged by the plaintiff, and then the defendant gets to respond. And you can read all of that without leaving your home 24 hours a day. It's very spendy if you were to say, gosh, here's the 50 people on my source list, I'm going to plug them all in. You might have a big bill. But if you're just backgrounding one person, one business, you're looking into a story, it's really very reasonable. And I definitely recommend it. It's called PACER, which is an acronym whose meaning is lost, at least to me. But it's a great resource. Just to very briefly repeat that sometimes on the criminal records side of things, the internet is one area where you're just not going to get everything that you want. You can often find out what exists, but for state level court documents, once you know they exist, you usually do actually have to either go to the courthouse, or for some of the more tech savvy courthouses, you can call, and with a case number, they'll email you the documents. So I know in Southwest Washington and Clark County, if you know there's a case, when you do the search, there's a case number, and you can say, will you email me document number? You call them up, ask them to email you document number 3, and they'll charge you your credit card for the cost of that. There's a public record cost. But so everything else that I'm going to talk about is online only and generally free. But before I move on from the criminal side, does anybody have any more questions? Anything else that you'd like to ask me? Okay. Yeah.
Calling the court usually give you where you want to go, or do you...
What you need, what you want to ask for is the clerk. The clerks are the ones that know everything. Being nice to them will get you a lot more information than if you're rude, because they have some discretion. And if they're slammed, they may say, I'm sorry, I can't help you. So you may want to try again later and see if you get a nicer clerk or at a less busy time. It depends on the courthouse and the policies of that particular courthouse. So I know in Oregon, I have been able to call, at Multnomah County in the past, I've been able to call clerks and ask them for some information, and when they're not slammed, they've been very generous in terms of looking stuff up and sharing stuff. But I've never gotten documents emailed to me. If I really wanted to see the document, I had to go to the courthouse.
They give you some information from the documents.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. And then in Washington, in Clark County at least, in Southwest Washington, I have been able to get documents emailed to me. It does cost, they have a per page charge, and I gave them my credit card number and information, and they emailed it to me just through a phone call. But it really does depend on the policies of each courthouse, so there's no hard and fast rule. Any other questions? Okay, so that's, the covering your ass step one is, are they really a criminal? Now, if you're looking into a business or a business person, you should also do a couple checks and say, is this business operating legally? In Oregon, all businesses that are operating legally need to register with the Secretary of State's Corporation Division. It's really straightforward and easy to do. I want to look something up. I should have come up with a list. Does anyone have a business you'd like me to plug in?
Nike.
Good call, Nike. If they're not registered, it'd be interesting. Yeah, really. So it looks like they've got multiple corporations, probably sub-entities that are registered. And I'm not sure which one is the main parent company, but I'll look up Nike Inc. So this tells us who their registered agent is, where their headquarters is, some of the names that they've got when they first registered, apparently in this. Hang on, I'm gonna see if I can zoom out. I can't see the whole site here. Okay, when they registered in 1978, apparently they had or in 1969, they actually registered under the name Sports Tech Inc. And then in 1978, re-registered as Nike Inc. I had no idea. If it's a more obscure company, you can often get the names of people who are associated with it. Yeah.
This is Anna Treasurer for a nonprofit. We also have to register.
Yes. Yes, that's true.
Nonprofits on here as well.
I think it's the same search, but I'm not positive about that one. Sure. What's your nonprofit? Okay. Hood River Cultural Trust. Let's see. That may be a separate search form. Here it is. So your nonprofit is current. That's good. There's your P.O. box. I hope Bill Sturman is still affiliated with you. Cool. Yeah. It's good to, it tells you, yes, this is a legitimate organization that's still in good standing with the state. And then if you are trying to dig deeper, it also tells you some of the names that are associated and addresses. Companies can hide some of that by using a registered agent to do it, and that'll be like often an attorney's office, and that might be the only name associated if they are, either if they just decided to hire someone because they didn't want to go through the pain, or if they're trying to hide something.
Does it mean very much if they've lapsed, if they're maybe have a payment due or something? I've noticed that looking at a couple of businesses where it's
It means they forgot to send in their corporation paperwork on
does that
time.
mean very much?
I would say
I would say
it's a minor red flag. With nonprofits and small businesses, it's fairly common because they're basically often, with small nonprofits and businesses, they're run by amateurs and they don't always know what they're doing. It doesn't mean they're malicious. It means they don't know. But with a larger company, I would say there's a problem if they don't know that they need to be registered with the state, or if their registration with any company, expired 3 or 4 years ago and they still haven't done anything. It's certainly something that at least, hey, I noticed you're not registered with the state. Can you explain what's going on there? They may say, oh crap, let me go fill out some paperwork. Yeah.
How long does it usually take before when they get registered, like if you search and they're not there, at least one?
It's fairly quick. I know that a nonprofit I'm involved in, when we re-registered, we did it on the web, so I would imagine if it's not instant, it should be within a couple of days. I wouldn't expect it to take.
As a small business owner who's registered their business,
Yeah.
I registered it online.
Yeah.
It was almost, if you register online, it's pretty much.
That's what I was expecting, yeah. Yeah.
I have a question. If you were looking for aggregate data, say on the number of businesses that are closing a specific area, this is not the site?
No, well, you don't, when you close, you don't have to, there's not a document associated with it like when you open, you just don't renew. So I'm not aware of a website that corrals that. I think you'd actually have to talk to people at that point. I would say maybe the Attorney General, excuse me, the State Corporations Division in Oregon, you could ask them how many businesses are not renewing their registrations. Now, that doesn't guarantee they're all closing. Some of them could be forgetting or missing the deadline, but and they'd have to either have that already or be willing to run a report for you to get it. Yeah. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Another place to look is, this is for folks that do contract, like painting, building, construction, et cetera. If they have to be registered with the state's Construction Contractors Board. It's good to know this if you have a home and you ever get any work done too. You should definitely check and make sure they're here and that they have a license, because if they don't, they're not insured when things go bad, and there can be really bad consequences. When you do this search, I believe it also tells you if there's any issues that they've had in the past that are unresolved. Oops, sorry. In Washington, the Department of, there's no statewide requirement that Washington businesses register with any agency. However, if they make enough money that they have to pay taxes, they're registered with the Department of Revenue. So basically, anything that's of significant size is going to be listed in the Washington Department of Revenue database. And you can search, the thing that's nice about this one is, actually you can do this in Oregon too, you can search by business owner or name. And it's basically the same concept as with Oregon, except that if someone's not listed, it's not quite the same level of red flag as it is in Oregon, because it may just mean that they're not profitable and don't have to pay taxes. And then in Washington, likewise, has a licensed contractor search. Theirs is nice because they make it easier to look up violators. They actually have a specific link for that, which Oregon does not. Yeah, I mean, you could certainly, you could do a search, look up violators in your community and do a story about, I mean, that's a story right there if you're geographically based, how many contractors are listed as violators with your, with your community that are apparently still doing business. The other two things that are the other thing that's worth doing when you're writing about a business is just finding out if people are complaining about it. There's the Better, I'm not going to click on these links, they're pretty obvious, but the Better Business Bureau, just plug them in. It takes 10 seconds. It might save you a pain in the butt hassle from people who call and say, how could you profile that mom and pop shop? They're such jerks. Everybody hates them. Well, Better Business will give you a tip off. Yelp and other review websites are also increasingly a source of this sort of thing. And then I recommend checking the company. If the company has a Facebook page, look at it. Sometimes people paste their complaints to the wall, and you can see it right there. It's not quite a database, but it's an online tool. Briefly for nonprofits, actually, before I pause, let me pause. Does anyone have any more questions about the business databases that I've gone over? So for nonprofits, if you're writing about a nonprofit, there's two websites that are pretty good, one of which apparently is upgrading this weekend, so I can't show you much with it. But Charity Navigator will, it's not very comprehensive. I looked for a few nonprofits. Some of them showed up, some of them didn't. So it seems to be mostly larger ones. And it takes IRS data. Let's see, let's hope I get lucky on this one. Peace Health is a nonprofit that is located in Washington State. See, here we go. No results. Is it 2 words? Thank you. And you can filter it down by state to make sure you got the right one. And it's not showing up. So I'll pick a different one at random. They have a formula they use that imports IRS data and says, okay, is this appropriate, the amount of money they're spending on operations versus salaries and other things like that, is that on programming, is that appropriate? They give it a star rating based on that. But it's not a perfect rating. If you're a service organization and all of your work is done by employees who get paid, it might end up looking like you're terrible people because you're not spending money in the community, but all those people are spending all their days providing a service. So you kind of have to, if you see a warning sign here, it's a reason to ask questions, not necessarily a reason to panic. But you can see it gives you a very nice snapshot of how efficient it is in terms of how they use program, where their spending is. It tells you from their most recent IRS filing what their revenue source was, what their expenses were, whether they had we don't use the word profit in nonprofits, but a surplus or a deficit at the end of the year, and who the leaders are. So it's pretty useful in a broad sense, yeah.
So nonprofits, they will file annual reports, right?
Right. Yeah, nonprofits that make more than $25,000 a year are required every year to file something called a 990 form, which outlines in broad terms, so not an exact budget, but what are their broad revenue sources? So, do you get it from program fees, from contributions, from government grants, that sort of thing, and their broad expense categories, including whether they spend money on sort of political action and lobbying. And in addition to that, they're required to name their senior executive, whether it's president or board member. They have to say who their highest paid employees are. They're above a certain threshold. It was $50,000 a few years back. I think that's higher now, but I'm not positive. And then they also have to list their board members and whether their board members have any compensation. You can ask them to give it to you, and they're legally required to provide it. Many don't know that they're legally required, and sometimes they'll give you a pain in the butt. However, it is something they're supposed to do. If their annual revenues are less than $25,000, they're not required to, they just have to fill out a postcard and send it in. There's no real information. Or they can do it on the web. The other thing is, just as individual taxpayers can ask for an extension, so can nonprofits. And especially with large and complicated nonprofits, that's very common. If you've ever looked into healthcare or hospitals, many major hospitals, their most recent tax filing was from 2008 or 2009, which is frustrating, but it's legal. So they're required to disclose it, and Charity Navigator extracts some of the information. The other side I want to tell you about, but as of this morning, I don't know that I can actually show you how it works, is, GuideStar is, is a website that takes these 990 tax forms. Yeah, they're upgrading their website today. This is a subscription required website, but you can get a subscription for free. All you need is an email address. Then when you search for a nonprofit, it doesn't just extract some of the information like Charity Navigator. It actually allows you to download their 990 forms. And so you can read through all of that information and get a lot more details than would be. I would say that Charity Navigator is the place to go if you're in a hurry and want a quick snapshot, because it can be hard to find the information you're looking for. GuideStar is where you go if you want depth and detail, or if the nonprofit you're looking for doesn't show up on the Charity Navigator website. So those are the kind of two best sites for charities, and you can also, as someone in the audience was pointing out, you can also, for Oregon, look and make sure that they are registered with the corporation division in the same way that you would search for a business. So does anyone have any questions on nonprofits? Okay, a few last things on the cover your ass front. Search, if you're backgrounding a person, put their name into Facebook, put their name into LinkedIn, put their name into other social media sites that might be appropriate for them and their industry. A lot of people have privacy settings and you won't be able to see any things, but some people don't, and you can find out what they're telling their friends about or how they're presenting their own professional background through LinkedIn. I also recommend just using your Google Foo. If you type in the name of a business or person and then the word scam, see what happens. That's where, or complaint. If it's multiple words to a name or a name of an individual, put that in quotes. So if you wanted to see what bad things people had to say about me, put Courtney Sherwood in quotes, and then complaints. Let's see if, I have someone who really doesn't like me. Let's see if that comes up. Yeah. Nope, that's my own posts. Well, if his Google,
minus Columbia.
oh, there you go, good call. No, oh, minus my own website.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, right. Well, there's another, yeah, it's a bad example, but nonetheless, it's, maybe I'm better than I thought I was, so.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so, yeah. Another thing that you can do, if you're not just looking for the bad stuff, is I really strongly recommend, sometimes if someone has a resume online, search for the word resume, and then try the same search again, resume.doc. Do they have a Word version? Maybe resume alone won't show you their most recent resume, but the .doc will show you the Word version, or docx for the more advanced version of Word. .pdf to see if it's a PDF version. Yeah, what's your question?
I was going to say, one of the things I love is just searching by file type.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, you can do that with an advanced search as well. You don't have to, so for example here, if you click on advanced on the, let me just show that again if you didn't see what I was doing. When you go to Google, under the search button, there's that option advanced search. And you can, so I want the exact wording or phrase of my own name. And then, where's the file type? Is that?
Second from the bottom.
Oh, there, file type. Yeah. So yeah, you can pick a file type. Maybe, you know, use the word, add the word resume, and then look for whether I have any. I don't think I have a PDF of my resume online, but if someone else does, it might show up. And sometimes the thing that's really interesting is I have found things that were not supposed to be publicly online but got indexed by Google this way, and it can be kind of cool. This is maybe getting ahead of myself a little bit, but if you know where somebody, in the advanced Googling tips, if you know where somebody works, or if you're backgrounding an organization or a government group, you can also do something, search by file type, and then search within a site or domain. So, you know, you could do, what's Multnomah County's domain? Multco.com. You know, you could do search inside of multco.com, .or.us. So if there's if anyone's foolish enough to post PDFs of their resumes on the Multnomah County website, that'd be interesting to see. No, but you know, a more appropriate, you know, you're looking for documents related to a topic that you're not able to find. That can be pretty, you can get some interesting and surprising results, some of which aren't linked anywhere obvious or that you might not find if you hadn't done the.
Google found them because they weren't careful.
Yeah, exactly. They weren't careful enough. So Google was able to find them. So I want to then, next I want to talk about sort of one step deeper than the basic cover your ass stuff, but we're low on time, so I'm going to sort of go through this at an accelerated pace here. The first thing that is really worth it, so this is where it's not just that you're writing about someone to make sure you don't make an idiot of yourself. You're actually trying to find out what they're up to, who they're doing business with, what's going on, and property records are really can be a very good source of information. If you live in Portland, you may be familiar with portlandmaps.com. This is a website where you can see who owns a property. If you have an address, but if you know where someone's address is, who owns it? I'll do my own. What they owe and what their property taxes are, what they paid for it, and then you can zoom out and look at a map and see who their neighbors are. You may want to get those neighbors' names and see if they've done any business with them in the past. So you can see I live in a place that was a small condo that was built in 1979, and I owe, however, you know, I own it with someone named Benjamin Lincoln, so now there's someone else to search if you're trying to dig into me. You know, my taxes are $2,065 this year. It's a lot of personal disclosure that is, but you can do it for anybody, and it's pretty fascinating. Yeah.
Also view when you go to the neighborhood,
Right.
where you can see business names associated with locales.
Yes.
So you can look up a physical location for, I mean, there's not a good way to do it, to look for a business that way.
Right.
But like, say you wanted to know how many of your neighbors rent a small business out of their house.
Yeah.
You can see that on that.
There's a lot of great stuff you can see. I mean, you can see whether they're maintaining their home, what kind of, they're getting permits to do work. And I think, whoops, I clicked too fast. You can even click through and see who we hired when we just did. I think it'll show us yeah, it got approved. I can see that. I know I've looked at plumbing. In some cases, you can actually get a scanned copy of like a document certifying that the plumbing was done or that the oil tank was removed or so on. So I'm not going to click on everything here because I want to go through a bunch more, but portlandmaps.com, fantastic site for both figuring out what is at an address and also establishing relationships and history and financial information about that address.
Well, you also can see a lot about the city.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. You can.
Some crime and census, if you're trying to do a report about, like there was an Oregonian article a few weeks ago about gentrification of certain neighborhoods.
Yeah.
You can find some of that data.
I don't know. I haven't checked this, but yeah, the census is 10 years old. So really the best source for census info is on the census's own website. And I'm sorry, I didn't go into, I don't have a lot of materials about sort of the aggregate data because I'm really focusing on backgrounding individuals, but there is a lot of good aggregate data both here and on the census.gov website. So if aggregating is something that you're interested in.
There's also people here in town in the Civic Apps area.
Right.
That go find these things.
Very true.
Aggregate.
Very true. Another source of property records I don't think is quite as well known as the Portland Maps website is the Multnomah County Property Records site. And it looks at first like you need to know somebody to get into it because you need this login. But then there's this little button here, guest login. And you can do the exact same thing, only better. So here's my address again. This one will tell you, Portland Maps tells you who the current owner is and how much they paid and how much previous people paid, but it doesn't tell you who those previous owners were. This website, if you click around, will tell you not only who owns it, but who they bought it from, who's owned it as far back as the database goes, what it's been paid, what people paid for it historically. And you can also look up a tax summary. I have identified that somebody wasn't paying their taxes through this. If you know their street address, you can find out if they're, so this tells us that every year since 1994 at least, the owners of my property have paid their taxes on time. But if we hadn't, it would tell us that they were missing taxes, and that can be a sign of something you want to look into. Yeah, so it tells you about improvements. It goes into, it doesn't have the aggregate, you can't like click and look at someone's neighbor, and the mapping functions that are on Portland Maps aren't there. It doesn't have all of the same info, but it does tell you more in some ways. So let's go back. I wanted to, I'm just going to sort of name these sites and you folks can click on them later, but in Clark County, Washington, I also have links to similar websites there. The Clark County Property Information Center is one where you can look up addresses and see similar stuff to the Portland Maps website. And then Clark County Auditor Records is a little bit, it only is online during when the county is in business. For some reason, they turn it off on weekends and evenings. So I can't really show you anything there right now. Yeah, but what it lists is all documents. You can't actually see, yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
Does the city run Portland Maps?
Yeah, or it might be Multnomah County that runs it, but it's one of the other.
Is it updated frequently?
Yes, yeah. My home was on there within less than a week of when we bought it. It had it. It might be instant. The Clark County Auditor Record Search. The one thing that's interesting about it is you can get a list of all of the records associated with the site and who else's name's on them. So if I took out a loan from a bank, it'll tell you the name of the bank that I took it out from. You can't actually look at the documents, but you get the date, a 2-letter abbreviated jargon code that tells you what kind of document it is, and then who's associated with it. So D, 1 or 2 letters, D stands for deed of trust, or D stands for deed, which means there's a transfer of property. DT stands for deed of trust, which is a real estate jargon for a mortgage document. And there's a lot of other letters that I don't have memorized, but I know you can see that a foreclosure notice has been filed on that property through this. You can see that someone's put a lien against it. If you want the details, you do have to go to the physical county building and look it up, but at least you know there's something to look up or there isn't. And in general, in Oregon and in Washington, there's a lot of privacy rules that prevent them from aggregating information or giving too much out over the phone. So beyond what you can get yourself online, quite often you really do have to go to the physical location to get more, and they're less friendly than the courts are sometimes about giving stuff out. If you're not in Multnomah or Clark counties, so I just have some words you may want to Google with the name of your county to help you find similar sites. GIS is a mapping language that's often used with these sites. You may just want to try auditor records or property records. A significant number of counties now have this online, but not every county. And then we're really light on time, but I'll just really quickly talk about some campaign finance websites for Oregon, Washington, and federal campaign information. This is great for individuals, businesses, and nonprofits, although nonprofits are somewhat limited in how they can spend money, so you're not going to see too much. But if you want to know who is lobbying who and how much, I'm sorry, lobbying is not the right word, who's donating to who and how much they're giving. Oregon's ORSTAR database, as someone who's mostly worked in Washington, I'm less familiar with this one than with the Washington one, but I know you can search by committee, by transaction, by candidate, and find out who's giving to candidates, to committees, et cetera. I've found that Washington's, to me at least, seems a little easier to use, I think in part because you can do these broader search that look up everything as opposed to having to know instead of having to search by candidate. And then of course federal campaign finance. The Federal Election Commission does post information online. I actually find, and there's some information that you can only get from them or only get from them very easily. However, if you're searching for individuals and trying to find out how much money they're giving to the presidential campaign of someone or a senator's campaign, I actually think the Open Secrets, which is a nonprofit website, their search is easier to use and just as good for most purposes. And then I've got some more information here on backgrounding. We're at 3. Do you guys want to keep going for a few more minutes, or should we just wrap it up and I can say it's all online? Okay, I'll go really quick. I'll keep it to less than 5 minutes. If you're backgrounding a business, here's a few more sites you might want to know about. Edgar is a search website run by the Securities and Exchange Commission. And this is only publicly traded companies that have to do this. So that would be Nike, a bunch of our tech companies out here are big, Nautilus, the vast majority of businesses in our region, and almost any small business is not going to be listed in Edgar. However, if you've got a rich person who might sit on some boards of non-local companies, they might be in here even if their company isn't. And if you're looking for individuals, you can do a full text search, plug their name in. If they have a fairly common name, it's not going to be very useful because the results are going to be so ginormous. If it's less common, you pull up any document that they're referenced in of any publicly traded company. You can also search here. I'm going to do Nautilus because I'm more familiar with them. Oops. You can search by company name or ticker symbol if you know their stock ticker symbol. So Nautilus is a Vancouver-based fitness company. This is a list of all of the documents they filed with the SEC. The big ones to look out for are 8K, 10K, and 10Q. A 10Q is a quarterly report every, 3 times a year, because one time a year they do an annual report. 3 times a year they say how they did the previous 3 months, how much money they made, how much they spent, what their profit or losses were, whether there's any lawsuits pending against them, whether there's any major risks pending. They're required by law to say that. I mean, they could say, you know, we're in an industry that's changing rapidly, that's very competitive, and we could go under at any time because of shifts in the industry. They could say we're being sued by our shareholders. Sometimes you can find very fascinating stuff. The 10K, so that's the 10Q. The 10K is going to have all of that, but it's going to be for the full year, and it'll also tell you how much the executives are paid, including, you know, basic pay, stock options, airplanes, cars, bonuses, retirement plans, and everything else. So it can tell you quite a lot of interesting stuff about a company. There's a great website that has been set up just in the last couple of years, usaspending.gov. Any company that gets a federal contract, so I'm going to put one in that I looked up earlier. Tappanee Underground is this is very common if you are in construction or contracting, but nonprofits are here that might be your local area agency on aging that's providing services to seniors and gets federal funding might be here. A huge array of businesses are here, and it will tell you how much money they're getting from the federal government and where. So this company here in Little Clark County has gotten, over the time period of this search, $48.4 million in federal contracts, and I can look at what each of those is for. Here's one for federal aid. You can click through and read more detail. In addition to knowing how much money they get, it also tells you more about business relationships, because maybe they're a subcontractor. Who are they subcontracting through? Or who are they hiring? All of that is here as you click through and dig around. Where are they doing work? Is it all in your community, or are they doing it elsewhere? Yeah?
One of the things that I've always wondered about when I'm looking at this is, you know, how often they're updated. Sometimes it's really hard to find out.
I know. I know this one is, you know, I don't know on any of these whether it's like daily or monthly or whatever, but I know it's very, very recent. What was that? Oh yeah, good call. On this one, I think it's after the end of the fiscal year, so it's not going to be like the day after a contract is awarded, but it is, we can look at the FAQ and see if it says anything. Yeah, I'm not going to take the time to read it really quickly, but there are, I mean, contractors and the government are required to do this by law, and
It's just so many of these
yeah.
database sites, you don't know how, it's hard to find out when they were last updated.
Yeah, I know on this one it is relatively recent, but I don't know the exact recent. Yeah. Like, for example, I know on GuideStar, GuideStar has ongoing public records requests with IRS, and it updates them as soon as it gets it. However, the IRS has discretion to take time to process things. It takes time. You know, the nonprofit has to fill out the form, send it to the IRS. The IRS has to receive it, process it, put it in its database, receive the request from GuideStar, process it, and send it back. So it's not going to be the next day. It may not be for a couple months. It's not going to be immediate, but it's not going to be ancient. So. A couple of other quick notes. So that's federal contracting. Layoff history. Companies over a certain size and laying off enough workers must issue something called a WARN notice. It's roughly over 100. If they're over 100 employees, it was complicated enough that I just sort of posted a link to the law because I didn't have room to summarize it all. But this will tell you if they've laid anybody off. There's an Oregon WARN notices website here that you can see, okay, Blue Heron started laying off 181 workers on February 28th, and they told the state on February 24th. You can print this list, you can export it to Excel, you can sign up to get email notifications anytime one of these notifications goes out. And when you sign up for the emails, you may actually get it a day or two before it's posted on the web. It's been something I've noticed. Washington has its own equivalent website. I think they must use the same software even because it looks exactly the same. But Washington's is a little easier to search. You can actually search by company or location. You can say, oh, I wonder if there have been any WARN notices lately in Vancouver. There they are. Yeah, fortunately, we've reported on these, so no big surprises. In very brief, OSHA the Federal Occupational Safety Health Administration posts incidents on their website. Environmental Protection Agency is another good one to look at. And each state has their own environmental site too. DEQ in Oregon, Department of Ecology in Washington. So there you go. And then at the bottom of this, if you want to look at it later, I have links to other folks who have roundups of sources for databases. So sorry I didn't have time to get into more details, but I can take any final questions, or I can talk to folks one-on-one afterwards if you have any questions. Thank you.